my friends. Welcome back to Alberta is My Country. This is about why Alberta should be its own country. Don't forget to share, to like, and to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Today, we're going to talk about Jason Kenney and his rise and fall as Premier of Alberta. Full disclosure, I went to Calgary and I voted for him in the leadership race. I also supported him as a Premier. Then, after he shit the bed, I voted against him in the leadership review. I see he's still trying desperately to remain relevant, but we will see. As far as his successor, Danielle Smith, I also have high hopes for her, but as a result of what happened with Jason Kenney, I'm cautiously optimistic. She definitely has more cojones than Jason Kenney did when standing up to Ottawa. But we'll see what the future brings, and if she will carry out the will of the people. So, back to the topic. Jason Kenney, the former Premier of Alberta. We're going to be focusing on his time in office during the lockdowns. Jason Kenney was a big name in Canadian politics, but his handling of the pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns led to some tough times and eventually for him to step down. First, a quick background on Jason Kenney. Born in Ontario, but grew up in Saskatchewan. He worked as a federal minister in Canada before moving to Alberta politics. In 2017, he helped unite the Conservatives into the United Conservative Party, or the UCP. And he became Premier in 2019 after winning a big election. Now let's talk about the COVID-19 lockdowns in Alberta. When the pandemic hit in 2020, Kenney's government put in place strict rules to stop the virus from spreading. Businesses like restaurants or gyms were limited on how many people could come in. Churches were shut down for in-person services, and some pastors who broke the rules got jailed. For example, Grace Life Church in Edmonton kept holding big gatherings, leading to protests and arrests. Pastor James Coates spent 35 days in jail. In Calgary, Arthur Pawlowski famously called the police Nazis and Gestapo when they came to his church after feeding the homeless in downtown Calgary. And he was arrested a number of times after that as well. The lockdowns were tough on everyone, especially seniors. Many older people were scared of catching the virus, so they stayed home. Some even waited in parking lots, asking strangers to buy groceries for them because they were afraid to go into the stores. This fear came from the mainstream media's daily news about rising cases and hospital overloads, which I always questioned, as it seemed nurses seemed to have a lot of extra time to make videos. If they were swamped, why are they making videos? As one expert put it, COVID is isolating our seniors, already a vulnerable and often lonely part of our population. When I saw those loved ones touching the glass and having an elderly parent touching the glass on the other side with tears streaming down their faces, it made my blood boil. How could this be happening? Many seniors shared, "I don't want to go through this ever in my life again," talking about the loneliness and the fear. A big part of Kenney's approach was giving a lot of power to Dr. Deena Hinshaw. She was Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, a doctor in charge of public health advice, but she was not an elected official. Kenney often said his government followed her recommendations without making any changes. For example, when they decided to lift some of the rules in 2021, Kenney said it was based on Hinshaw's plan. Critics said it was like handing over control to someone not voted in by the people. Hinshaw later apologized for how she explained some of the changes, saying, quote, "I am sorry that the way I communicated about the plan changes to our COVID-19 response has caused feelings of confusion, fear, or anger." End quote. But here's where things got really tricky for Kenney. In June of 2021, Photos leaked of him and some cabinet ministers having dinner on the rooftop of one of the government buildings called Sky Palace. They were sitting close together, not wearing masks, and there were wine bottles on the table. This broke the rules that they had set for everyone else, like keeping 2 meters apart. Kenney at first said, it's okay. But after some backlash, even from his own team, he apologized and said we have to hit a higher standard and that he regretted what happened. I think he just regretted getting caught. At the end of the day, it left a feeling of rules for thee, but different rules for me. And that hurt his image a lot. Now, Alberta, to be clear, already has an emergency plan. If there's a fire, you grab this binder. If there's a flood, you grab this binder. If there's a pandemic, you grab this binder. So why wasn't Alberta's emergency response plan followed? Lieutenant Colonel David Redman, a retired military officer, was the guy who helped create Alberta's plan for pandemics back in 2004, and it was upgraded in 2014. He ran the Alberta Emergency Management Agency. Redmond says the plan was designed for a targeted approach, protect the most vulnerable, like our seniors, keep schools and businesses open, and avoid full lockdowns unless absolutely necessary. But instead, the government used public health rules that led to broad shutdowns across the province. Redmond criticized this, saying it caused more harm than good, like mental health issues and economic damage. He blasted the approach. His direct quote, "Governments took every plan they ever had written down and threw them all out the window, and they used fear as a weapon. In emergency management, you never use fear. You use confidence." End of quote. Lieutenant Colonel David Redmond believes if they had stuck to the plan, there would have been no lockdowns, and things would have been better handled under the emergency management, not just the health officials. All of this led to Kenney's fall from grace. By 2022, many in his party were unhappy with how he handled COVID. Some thought the rules were too strict, some thought they were too loose. There was a leadership review vote, and he only got 51.4% support. That's a win on paper, but it's not enough to win an election. He resigned as UCP leader that night, even though he stayed on as premier a little bit longer. His style was seen as too controlling, and the lockdown split his party. In a leaked recording, Kenney even called his critics lunatics trying to take over the asylum. It was a huge drop from someone who started out so strong. In the end, Jason Kenney's time as premier shows how tough leading during a crisis can be. The pandemic tested everyone, and his choices like relying on Dr. Hinshaw, the lockdowns, and that dinner, well, that played a big role in his downfall. Thank you, my friends. That's everything for this week. Thanks for listening, and remember, Albertans don't kneel.